computer.
Oh boy.
Okay, all right. Well, so hello to our friends of UCC. Grateful to be here today. Grateful for you all for joining this conversation. And we're joined on this call. So we've got the Ellis fam, Drew and James and Scott and Ann. Thanks for joining us here in Cincinnati. And then, of course, we're joined by our friend Leslie Hall,
Hey,
who has
hey.
hopefully found some reliable Wi-Fi
Yeah,
in
very
London.
thankfully so.
Yeah, very good. So thanks to each of you and Leslie for just being willing to spend a little time together. I know this is your Sabbath, so I do hope that this is a restful space and that you can find some space in your week to have a proper Sabbath.
Yeah.
Um, so thanks for joining. I'm going to just jump in. And Leslie, I know that not everyone watching this video will necessarily have met you or know you.
Mhm.
So I'd like to start just with a little bit of an introduction, just to
Yeah.
give folks a better sense of who you are, and then to help us locate better within your story, particularly where your story brings you today. So let me ask you a few grounding conversation or questions just to ground our conversation.
Yeah.
You spent most of your time in Ohio, correct? You grew up in Ohio.
Yeah. Grew up in Middletown, so just a little bit outside of Cincinnati.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, went to high school up at Bishop Fenwick, lived the whole like Catholic school Cincinnati life. So that whole question of like, where did you go to high school? Yeah,
All right,
resonate.
you're familiar. Okay, so you went to Catholic school. So did you grow up in the church?
No, my parents chose Catholic school as a thing because of the educational value of it. I had no um kind of religious inklings of like how I want my kid to have a journey with Jesus. So really only became a Christian when I was a teenager.
Okay.
Um, and then yeah, really have a lot of there's been a whole healing journey with my family. And one of the most beautiful things is God has really given the church to me as family. Has given me lots of different moms, lots of different dads, lots of aunts and uncles, nieces and nephews, that whole dynamic. And really, the church became family for me ever since I was 13 years old and never really stopped. The
Yeah.
family just keeps getting bigger.
Yeah, that's the beauty of the body of Christ, I think.
Yeah.
No, that's really wonderful. Okay, so you attended CCU, Cincinnati Christian.
Yeah.
Rest in peace, Cincinnati Christian.
Rest in peace.
Uh, you attended CCU. Was Bible college a long-standing desire? When did you when did that become a pull for you to go off to study the Bible?
Yeah, I was really well discipled by my community in Middletown. I It was really amazing. I did about every Bethmore Bible study humanly possible, and I was with women who just voraciously were all about scripture. So when I was like 17, 18 years old, deciding like what do I want to do with the rest of my life, like studying the Bible was the only thing I ever wanted to do, and really felt the Lord call me into ministry, not with any like people group in mind, but just had a heart for the church, had a heart for seeing people get really passionate about the transformation of Jesus and the transformation of scripture, and doing kind of all the Jesus stuff in a lot of ways. And I mean, a lot of the people in my community back in Middletown were going to Cincinnati Christian, so it was really it felt like the only option for me. So I went to CCU really fully expecting to be a scholar, really wanted to do the whole like master's PhD route, and
Huh.
then realized like God was a really gentle God and said, Leslie, you love people. You don't love reading and writing papers. Like, please don't do that to yourself. So uh kind of moved and decided to focus more on ministry as my degree. So yeah.
Got it. That's good. I didn't know that part of your story. That's really good. And what a gift to be in a community, a church community at a formative age.
Mhm.
Yeah, to disciple you well, as you said.
Yeah.
That's really great. So was CCU your connection to UCC, as it was for a
Yeah.
lot of people, the pipeline from CCU to UCC?
Basically, yeah. I think um I had a really great community of friends while I was at CCU, and all of them ended up doing, an internship with UCC. I was in Jamie Smith's all of his Greek classes and all of his New Testament classes, and it just was too easy.
Yeah.
I remember I took Greek with Jamie, and he invited a few of us over to watch Monty Python and like have dinner with him and Mandy, and it was kind of just like a yeah, of course I'm going to end up going to church here because this just, it makes sense. Like these are the people who like love me, care about me, and want to see me grow in my leadership and in the things that God's called me to. So UCC just made sense in a lot of ways, and especially as Mandy was like in her position of leadership, and me as a woman, I had to figure out like how does this fit in? Like how do I reconcile my calling and what that looks like in the kingdom of God? And Mandy was a really great kind of mentor and someone who really helped me discern through like what does it look like to follow the call that God has placed on my life. And UCC became a place where I could flourish and begin to like step into what that looked like in so many ways.
Right. Oh, that's beautiful. I think that's not to go too far down a rabbit trail, but that's a noticeable gap, I think, in our city with the closing of CCU. I mean, that was, and, such a pipeline for so many people into the local church. It's disappointing to see, the school close, but encouraging to hear all of the different lives touched, over the course of that school's history. So that's great, Leslie. Okay, any reflections on your time at UCC?
Oh,
What was UCC to you? Or
wow. I think while I was because I came into UCC in the latter half of my at time at CCU, and then after like post graduation, and I was involved with UCC at a really key pivotal part of my life when I was essentially going through my quarter life crisis, and was really discerning through so much of my life and what calling looked like and what do I do. I feel like I can't really enter into ministry in the church for so many different reasons. I didn't know what to do. So I was sat at Rose Street one day, got and ended up just being given a job and like got involved in coffee. And UCC just became almost like this cocoon space of like, this is what it looks like to heal. This is what it looks like to begin an inner journey of transformation. This is where I really began to discern through like my what has now become my calling as a spiritual director. All of that really like had deep rootedness within my time at UCC and in the conversations that I had, at Rose Street on in like the evenings with like our college ministry stuff, like all and having so many different conversations with leaders and others in the community. It was the platform in which like I'm doing most of the things that I'm doing now in all reality. Which is just the crazy like like to really begin to look back at it and see how God was really like connecting all the dots together. And now it totally makes sense to me. So honestly, like I wouldn't UCC was the place in which I could grow deeper roots. I mean, kind of no pun intended. But all of that ended up being the flourishing that I now get to experience here in England and here in London, and that I get to share with other people, if that makes sense. Like that there's this real multiplicative kind of thing happening here, that because I was deeply poured into by leaders and by the community of UCC, I now am able to pour that out in a space where that's just not
Mm,
like it's just not that kind of thing doesn't really exist here.
I see.
And it's like truly just an honor and a privilege, if I'm honest.
Yeah, no, that's great. It's interesting. We've been talking about, for the church's 34, 35-year history, there's a grief that comes with the revolving door nature of UCC because we're in a transient environment, ministering to largely college students. And at the same time, in fact, Scott, being on the call here, Scott talks about UCC as like a dandelion church. When a dandelion goes to seed,
Yeah.
you blow it and it kind of goes everywhere. And we've been talking about the gift it is to instead of saying, oh, we only have students for this short period of time. What does it look like to realize that we have students for this short period of time, where if we can help in that season of their life deepen their roots, just as you said, deepen their intimacy with God and with Christ as they go, what
Mhm.
a blessing, what a gift. So I think that's really interesting to hear that reflected to some extent in your story, that there was some foundational stuff happening in your time at UCC that sounds like has been instrumental in what you're doing
Yeah,
now.
100%.
That's really good, Leslie. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, so you attended UCC in the latter half of your education. You served at Roastery Cafe for a number of years, got really into coffee. I know you were involved with other aspects of the ministry at UCC. When did you first begin to sense a call to the missions field, and
Mhm.
what was that like?
Well, I explicitly told God I never wanted to be a missionary, and you know what happens when you tell God I never want to do something. So, um, I during my what would have been my third year at CCU, I actually did a internship here in the UK, in a little suburb of Oxford, called Bicester, or Bicester is kind of how it's spelled, so it's a bit tricky, for the American speakers. And I honestly, I signed up to do a 10-day mission trip with CCU, and a mentor of mine saw that and said, why don't you do a 10-month internship instead? And I had never really encountered missions, never really thought of what it looks like to be a part of the church globally, and never, like, didn't really imagine that as part of my life. And in that 10-month period, God radically changed my life and gave me, um, so many gifts, and so many things were planted in that time that I'm still kind of unraveling to this day. And in so many ways, God really transformed my heart for places that, are deeply post-Christian. So that idea of an environment that has experienced the beauty of the kingdom in its past, but, there's a thinker called Mark Sayers who describes post-Christianity as, a culture that desires the kingdom without the king. So longs for all of the things of God's kingdom, of justice, of sacrificial love, and all of that, but doesn't want Jesus at the center of that. And I realized in those 10 months when I was here, when I was, 21 years old, that God has uniquely gifted me with talents and gifts that play into what it means to reach that kind of demographic. Um, and I had a taste for that, and then got really, through my time at UCC, in the in between, before, like, I moved here originally in 2012, and then when I moved back in 2018, a lot of that time was a season of God really sifting a lot within me and really preparing my own heart to be able to experience what it meant to be on mission, to be someone who's pouring themselves out in a community like this. So that season of the in between at UCC really was just a preparation time in so many ways to move back to England, move back into, eventually moving into London and seeing God move in that kind of way. It was, yeah, I still, like, I in every, like, earthly way, it doesn't make sense for me to be here. Like, it just, I it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make sense financially. It doesn't make sense logistically, but in a kingdom sense and from a kingdom mentality, this is the thing I was created to do. And it's the, like, honor and privilege of a lifetime to be able to steward my gifts in this kind of way.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. So that's interesting that how you talk about a preparation time, because that's about a 6 year window
Yeah.
of preparation time, which is interesting. I've heard that similar language of this sort of we desire kingdom things, but without the king at the center, or we want the things of the kingdom, but without the king. And
Yeah.
I think that that speaks to a lot of what we're ministering against or to or within, here just on a college campus, as
Yeah.
you.
100%.
So you've been serving in the UK then since 2018.
Yeah.
You recently said, I think in one of your newsletters, that the UK just listed Christianity as a minority religion in the country for the first
Yeah.
time in
Yeah.
generations. So, yeah, can you give us more of a snapshot of the context within which you are ministering? What are
Yeah.
some of the differences? What are some of the things that are the same about ministering in mid-sized Midwestern city in America versus an international city like London? What do you
Yeah.
notice?
When I reflect back on what it was like to be in a US context, is most people know a Christian. They at least know someone who is involved in a church community, it will invite their kids to a VBS in a Sunday kind of um, situation during the summertime. Like have some kind of connection to a loving, grace-filled church community. And the difference is in somewhere like London, and especially in so I live in Soho, so kind of the dead center of the city amidst, I mean, a little bit of everything. Of just around the corner from my flat is the most sex trafficked street in all of the city. And you'll have, I regularly will brush shoulders with celebrities, but I also have regular relationships with a lot of the people experiencing homelessness in the city. Like you get a mixture of the entire world almost. And what I've come to realize in these relationships is most of the time I'm the only Christian that a lot of these people will ever meet. I'm the only Christian that they'll
Oh,
have connection to. And there's a real like truly a huge honor and privilege because I'm such an oddity to so many people that it opens up so many different conversations. As soon as anyone asks the question, like if I'm in my like gym community, and it's a very easy thing of like, okay, what do you do? And my first words are, I'm a spiritual director. Like people have all kinds of different mentalities of what that could be. I it's been a real interest. There's been a lot of real interesting conversations with that,
huh.
but the real opportunity of it is there is a spiritual kind of hunger in this place, within London, especially just really being able to have an antenna and a real sense to, okay, um, people desire something more than what they're experiencing on the day to day. Like there is a hunger for more. So you'll see people chasing it in different ways, but then to offer up um, a non-anxious disposition in one of the most stressed out cities in the world is such an invitation for so many people. So being able to, I mean, even just have even recently the opportunity to share the gospel in the middle of a members only club in London at 12:30 at night because all my friends invited me into this situation and someone asked the question, "What do you do?" And it turned into I get to share about who Jesus is. And I mean, sometimes you get different responses, but to have a captivated audience of people who are like, wow, I've never heard anyone describe it quite like that. Or I think that's the way that you talk about Jesus and the way you talk about Christianity. That's something I could get behind. And that's a different way of seeing Christianity than I've been delivered through the media or through um, pop culture's view of what these crazy Christians are like. Like I get to offer up an alternative that actually reflects who Jesus is. And that's honestly, it's the greatest joy and honor of my whole life. And I pinch myself every day. It feels like I can't believe this is real.
Mm.
And the fruitfulness that I continue to see in it, like is unbelievable. I still can't believe it. There's two individuals specifically that I'm thinking about, and just the way God has moved over the last like 48 hours to see these relationships just like deepen and have there be so much like spiritual hunger in those things, and like really for them to be searching that out within me is just, I can't believe it. And it's really difficult because relationships take so much time to build in this kind of context. But when it finally hits and you finally have built that trust, man,
Mm.
it's really, really amazing.
That's great, Leslie. No, that's really wonderful. It sounds. I mean, and I'm not surprised that your ministry approach is deeply, deeply relational. It's
Mm.
about sharing life and doing shared things like going to boxing gyms and things. I
Yeah.
read about this and things, and I'm like, yeah, that makes sense to me. That's really, really, really beautiful. And I love how you talk about being just the power of being a non-anxious presence in a very stressed out city. I think that speaks volumes to me as well. The antidote to some of what we experience in highly urban international cities like London is simply to be non-anxious. I mean, what a interesting way to think about ministry. That's really good, Leslie. So I was nosing around your website, as I do, a couple of weeks back, and I found myself smiling almost the entire time as I read about how you describe your ministry and how you talk about your calling. And I think we have a shared love for language, so that was part of why I was smiling, and the importance of language. And I wonder if you can offer some reflection on how you talk about your ministry focus. So you describe your ministry focus as being the formation of resilient disciples. And I read that and I just went, yes, preach it, Leslie. So can you talk a little bit about the word formation? What does that word mean to you?
Yeah. So, I mean, I, we, the like thing, formation has kind of become a real kind of sexy thing to talk about within a lot of church circles. And it's this idea that, okay, for like formation happens intentionally, like, oh, we need to be spiritually formed. But the thing about formation is we're constantly being formed by the world around us, whether we like it or not. Like where we put our attention, where we put what we're thinking about, we are constantly being formed by. So we're being formed by our phones, we're being formed by the music we listen to, the relationships we have. I mean, if you think about it, you end up sharing the language of those you're around. You'll be able to inflect the way that other people around you inflect. You'll start using the same vocabulary. Well, with spiritual formation, I long to help people create and develop patterns and rhythms in their life to be formed into the image of Jesus. Because at the end of the, and I love the language around what it means to be an apprentice of Jesus, to be someone who draws near to Jesus so deeply that we essentially get covered in the dust as he walks. Like we want to be people that are deeply entrenched in doing what Jesus did, becoming more like Jesus, and just spending time being with Jesus. So really adopting and helping people adopt um, patterns and practices and rhythms to be able to live those things out on a daily basis, and something that just makes sense for people's lives. Like I think people think that formation has to be this thing where I have to radically transform my life. I have to become a monk. I have to move outside of the city. I have to do these things. But my heart and my dream is to see almost like monastic communities rise up in an urban environment to be practicing the way of Jesus for the sake of the city. And it looks like regular rhythms of prayer, silence and solitude in the midst of a really noisy culture, radical generosity, Sabbath, hospitality, all of these things that honestly lead to life for ourselves and also lead to life for those around us. So I'm really passionate about formation because I mean, we're always going to be formed. I just want to be formed, and I want to be personally formed in the image of Jesus, and I want those around me to also be formed in the image of Jesus, because I take it really seriously when he said that I'm the way, the truth, and the life. And if you want to have life abundantly, it's following after our Creator and following after the one who, when we can live out of the same spirit that raised Christ from the dead, that same spirit that like spoke all of creation into existence, that we get to have that and we get to walk in the world with that. Like,
Yeah,
why would we want to do anything else?
right,
So
right. No,
I,
that's good.
yeah,
Said, speaking my language, sister. I think the that image you just gave us, be covered in the dust of Jesus as he walks. What a powerful image. No, thank you for that, Leslie. Formation, and then talk a little bit about the word resiliency. You know, it's
mm,
interesting. Me and DJ, this has come up in our conversations recently. And in the sector that I came from, kind of civic innovation of the past 10, 15 years, this has been a prominent word, resiliency. And he's finding it now in his work in community-led design and things like that. We want to be resilient neighborhoods. I
yeah.
haven't heard too many people talk about it in the context of discipleship. But as I read again, was reading how you were using that word, I got really curious. So why resiliency?
Yeah, on to be honest, literally everything I say, I'm borrowing language from a lot of other people that are way smarter and way more wise than me. So the idea of a resilient disciple of Jesus came from research that Barna, they do a lot of research around like population studies and studies about how Christianity is interacting within culture. And they discerned that there's only a very small population of those who claim to be Christians who would fall into the category of a resilient disciple, someone who's shaped by the word, someone who is deeply invested in a church community, has prayer at the center of who they are, and lives out of a true identity of being transformed by Jesus. And the idea of being resilient is, I tie it back to a promise that Jesus spoke, is that in this world you will have trouble, but take heart that I have overcome the world, that Jesus is the one who overcomes. And we have that, the spirit of the one who overcomes and the spirit of the one who's interceding on our behalf at the right hand of the Father. Like that's our identity. That's who we are. So we're constantly going to need to be resilient as disciples of Jesus in this world. Like we will experience hardship, and we will experience, I think even further and further down the line, kind of the viewpoint that I see culture kind of going down, like it is really going to only get harder and more difficult. And that's not something that should be a surprise to any of us. But it's also, honestly, in a lot of ways, something that we can rejoice in, to recognize that if we share in the sufferings of Christ, we'll also share in the beauty of the resurrection of Christ. So in thinking about resiliency, it's choosing to cling to Jesus and trust that in anything that feels like death, there's always going to be resurrection that comes in that, and that's something that we get to rejoice into. So yeah, when I think about resiliency, it's tied together with formation. It's tied together with what it means to choose Jesus in the midst of things, saying do the complete opposite. And I think the only way you can really do that is within community, that you need people alongside you to be spurring you on, because if we try to do it alone, there's no way. There's no way. And that's the beauty. That's why community is the utmost importance of what it means to be a resilient disciple. You have to have people alongside you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I appreciate that you bring that into your thinking there, right? Formation within Christian community, as opposed to this just, we think it's kind of one direction. We have our own spiritual
Yeah.
experience and relationship with God. It doesn't quite work that way.
Yeah, it just becomes like a weird self-help thing at that point, and becomes
Right.
yeah, just real devoid of the kingdom of God, which if
Right.
yeah, it lacks the real heart of Jesus to be living for the sake of the other.
Right. And missing the missional piece, right? Like we're formed for
100%.
mission. There's that whole sent thing, to tie it back to what you're in London. I mean, you're there to join what God is already doing in
Yeah,
London. And so the formation isn't just for our own edification, it is for mission. And
yeah,
yeah, and that has to happen within the context of community. To be a movement,
100%.
right? To be a movement, to join this great Christian movement.
Yeah,
Good stuff, Leslie. So I know leadership formation is something that you're passionate about. I think I read that your title with GEM, or your role with GEM, is landing
yeah,
pastor for GEM UK, GEM. That's the
yeah,
missions organizations you're with.
yeah.
So that seems to have a leadership equipping component
Mhm.
with it. Tell us just a little bit more about what's the day to day of your work. So like nuts and bolts, what are you doing? And I qualify like seasons of prayer and abiding. That's also doing. Uh,
Yeah,
but what are you doing?
yeah. Yeah, it's a focus on my own spiritual formation. So, regular rhythms. Like I have a rule of life that I live by. I have rhythms of prayer that I live by. And then really just meeting with people and helping them do the exact same thing. So my role as a landing pastor within Greater Europe Mission and within the United Kingdom as a whole is, for the first year of anyone coming into the organization and coming into this field, I become their spiritual director, and they're kind of like cultural Sherpa in a couple ways of helping people acclimate to, this is how you live in a new culture. These are the frameworks that you can adhere to. And this is how you set up a rhythm that leads to long-term fruitfulness rather than burnout. So that's part of my role. So I meet with individuals in different kind of capacities, really hands-on at first. And then as you get further into your year, letting them kind of fly out of the nest a little bit more. And then as a spiritual director, I meet with individuals for both spiritual direction and spiritual formation. I kind of like to differentiate between these two things. Within spiritual direction, It's just setting time to be attentive to the conversation that God's continuously wanting to have with each of us. So a lot of it will look like a counseling kind of environment, but rather than me offering any kind of advice or offering to, help fix different situations, I create space, ask questions to allow people to make space to hear from God more and to be attentive to how God is moving and shaping within themselves, and just kind of again be a spiritual companion with them along their journey. And then in that kind of sense, a real prayerful sense in spiritual direction with spiritual formation, it's doing all of the like, how can you create a rule of life? How can you build your life around the teachings and practices of Jesus? And what does it look like to really make that very tangible, really practical? Reading the Bible with people, meeting to help do any kind of discipleship stuff. And that looks like grabbing coffees at times. That looks like going with people to IKEA, like just doing it in a daily kind of way. It doesn't have to be ridiculously formal. It can be as mundane as going to Tesco, like a local grocery together, and just doing life that way, cooking a meal together, meeting up at the pub for a few drinks, watch the World Cup matches, and have a conversation at the same time that is deeply about following the way of Jesus in ordinary spaces.
That's great. Sounds like Jesus. Really good. Meals together, walking with one another. That's really good.
Crazy.
Good stuff. And boxing as well. I do.
Yes. Well, um, so I used to be a part of a gym,
Okay.
and one of the key community parts of that was a boxing community where it's the craziest thing. Like I still don't really understand how God got me into this space, but it is just a community of people who just want to be around each other all the time and invite me into that, and now are deeply invested in coming to hear me preach and hear me do different things on Sundays, like come to our carol service tomorrow, like all of these things. And I'm like, this is a group of people that should never walk into a church, but are somehow now deeply invested in following uh like they're following me as I'm following Jesus, and I hope that they eventually end up following Jesus as well. And I still honestly, it's a ragtag group of people, and I absolutely love every single one of them.
Wow. Amazing. Well, that's a good segue into, as you just reflect on the last 6 months or so. Um, what's that been like for you? What's some of the fruit you're seeing? You've shared some of that. What have been some of the challenges? What's this season been about for you?
Yeah. Within that boxing community, like there there's a gal who she's probably one of my favorites in the group. And we had a conversation a couple days ago. We're talking about music. She helps run a really cool music venue here in London. And we were chatting, and turns out she mentioned something about music, and she said, well, I could play some Hillsong for you and you'd probably really enjoy that, wouldn't you? And I was like, how in the world do you know about Hillsong? So ended up finding a little bit about her story. Like
Huh.
she went to church as a kid, fell out of it for a lot of honestly like justifiable reasons, was really, really deeply hurt. But we ended up chatting for about 2 hours, just in a pub the other night. And she texted me, and it was a really beautiful conversation. She was really keen to potentially come check out the church that I'm involved with.
Wow.
And I was like, Jesus, if I have only been in this boxing community for her to like come back into a deeper relationship with you, then it was literally all worth it. Like every single bit of it, every ounce of sweat, every bit of effort and energy, totally worth it for her. And then she texted me the next day and just was like, hey, I really appreciate that conversation. That was so good. I am so thankful for you. And I was like, oh, I can't believe it. And like so that's one situation. And then like it's been wild. In the new church community that I'm serving with in an area of London called Shoreditch, it's been absolutely phenomenal to develop more spiritual direction relationships and see more and more, especially like young women in the same kind of, late 20s, early 30s kind of community who are just ridiculously passionate about prayer. And they're coming to me and they're like, how can we create better rhythms of prayer in our life? So we're beginning to create a community of just deeply prayerful women who want to pursue Jesus in that. And that's just been a
Wow.
huge answer to prayer in so many ways of like, I think when a community gets really passionate about prayer and really passionate about pursuing God in like the secret places, I think there's huge things that God wants to do on the back end of that. I think there's revival on the other side of that, and I'm really excited for the next year of ministry in a lot of ways because I think there's going to be a lot of fruitfulness. But as far as like challenges, yeah, it's been tricky. I had two housemates that I lived with for most of my time living in London, and both of them ended up moving away for different really beautiful reasons. But now my living situation is in a bit of a new kind of environment. It's not bad by any means. It's just learning new rhythms. Um, there's been I've been sick pretty much all year. It's been really, really tough. Had COVID twice, bronchitis, like colds, like it felt like just a really tough year in a lot of ways. I start out every year with like a phrase or something I prayerfully kind of feel like God's really leading me into. And this year, my phrase was ruthlessly pursue joy. And I was really fixated on the joy portion of that statement. But I had over the last year, it's been more of a ruthless, like that's had to be the real key piece of it. It has been really difficult in all reality um to continue to show up every day for health reasons. I've had some financial, like because of the financial support aspect of my life and what that looks like, having lost a lot of that for no other reason than the economy is rubbish right now and people are deeply struggling. And that affects the people I love. And it in turn affects the way in which I have to do things. So things kind of had to hit the chopping block of, I can't do this. I can't do this. Can't do this. And the gym membership was part of that. And what I love is that God is so good that even though, yes, I'm no longer able to be there on a daily basis, like those people still want to maintain relationships. So I'm thankful for the ways that, God solidified those relationships in the time that I had the capacity to be in that community. And even now that can't exist anymore, like God is still carrying that through and God is still really opening doors with those people. So, yeah, what the enemy intended for evil, like God can turn into good. And what feels like lack at times is actually like I really do like try to trust that like we serve an abundant God and that I'm gonna be provided for no matter what, and just really continue to walk in that.
Yeah, no, that's good, Leslie. Thanks for sharing as well. I think it's easy to just point to like your wonderful things, but the reality is, yeah, this is hard. Ministry is hard. Living is hard.
Living's hard sometimes.
Hard. I think there's a reason they call it the human condition. I think it's like it's challenging, to continue to faithfully walk day after day after day, knowing that the enemy's always trying to trip us up. So
Yeah.
thanks for sharing that as well. That's good to know some of the struggle. And so yeah, so I want to talk just briefly in this by way of close as we sort of wrap up. London's not cheap, right? So you are tasked with raising your own support. That's no easy feat. Can you just be real frank? And like, what are your hopes for raising funds in 2023? Like, what's your monthly gap? I mean, be as frank as you can because we want
Yeah.
to share this with the community and see
Yeah.
what God lays on people's hearts.
Yeah. So I my family of origin really lives in like a poverty kind of mentality of like there's not going to be enough, so just like keep on going on. And I think really the thing that God has really been speaking over my heart is, one, I'm not an orphan, and two, like God is abundant and is going to provide, and I need to actually start living like that's true. need to actually start living like my dad is going to provide for me. So I need to stop trying to live paycheck to paycheck and start trying to like live a more, yeah,
Resilient.
a more resilient life. And I need to be more gracious with myself,
Mm,
and
good, good,
not treat myself like a slave. And really recognize my worth and my value as a child of God. And in order to make that possible, and in order to like help pay off, thank hopefully I can get some student debt relief. We'll see what happens. But to be able to kind of like take the pressure off a bit, I do need to raise about $1,000 per month, to really move into a space of living into, okay, you're going to be able to breathe at the end of every month and not feel like you're pinching pennies and skipping meals in order to make things continue to flourish in this community, because that stress takes a toll on my own health and well-being, and in turn makes it really difficult to be able to serve people really well. So my hope and prayer, is to be able to close that gap. So yeah.
good. Thanks. It's good to know just specifics around that. Thanks
Yeah.
for sharing
Yeah, of course.
that. Well, I just as a final question, and then Drew and Ann and Scott, if you have anything you want to add, please
Yeah.
unmute yourself and add. But this is a big question, Leslie. But if you've had a chance to reflect, or if anything comes to mind, I just wonder, as we are coming to the end of a calendar year. Happy birthday soon, by the way, and
Appreciate it.
moving into 2023.
Yeah.
What are some ways that you're longing to see God move in the year ahead?
Yeah, I'm about like a week before I do, like I've got 2 weeks off at the end of the year and I'm so excited. This is my favorite time of year. I love reflecting on like the last year, and I love like dreaming ahead for the next year. And I actually like I'm able to look right now at I have create little, like I've done this since 2014, and like I have little like resolution little like post-it notes on my laptop. And one of the things that's even on here is like, what does it mean to be set apart and consecrated? Um, and what does it mean to not be conformed to the image of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of our mind and our heart? Um, and just that idea of putting myself in a position to be that Isaiah like kind of 6 mentality of God coming and putting a coal on my lips and saying, I've made you pure. I've made you to be a voice to the nations. So when I think about, what the next year looks like, there's going to be, thinking about my leadership within GEM, there's a lot of upcoming opportunities to do a lot of really cool stuff. Um, Nothing's for sure yet, so I can't like I'd love to chat details at a later point.
Right.
But it's a lot of like, wow, this is the stuff I've dreamed of my whole life.
Mm.
This is the kind of movement of God I've longed to see since I was a teenager. Like, we might get to be a part of like an incredible move of the Holy Spirit across London. And I pinch myself every day that I can't believe this is all real. Like, I was chatting with a group at church, and one of the vicars of our community, Toby, I mean, we were talking about it, and we're like, we're in the golden years. Like right now, we're in the time where we will look back 20 years from now and be like, this is the stuff. Like, this is the stuff. But we got to see, 80 people come together in a little like square during the summertime, and we did a barbecue, and people got healed while we were eating like barbecue chicken together in this park, and like just the crazy kind of stuff. Like, there, I feel like we're on the edge of that, and I'm very excited about that. And I think it takes a long time to build a foundation in this kind of in London and in this culture. And in my relationships, people consider me a Londoner now. And in my relationships, we've hit that point of trust where we're having conversations unlike anything I've ever had before. So yeah, it just feels like I'm beginning to like taste and see that the Lord is good, and all the fruitfulness that I've like planted seeds in is really coming to fruition right now. So there's a lot of hope and dream for the next year. And even in this time next year, I will be a permanent residence here, so I won't have to do visa paperwork anymore. I will be legally able to work at a coffee shop again. And y'all, I cannot tell you how excited I am about that. I've I really want to make a really good flat white for someone again. I want to like duck back into all those little like Rose Street habits that I have because
Yeah,
I'm really good at it. And I know that that is like an opportunity for ministry that God really wants to do. And, kills multiple birds with multiple
yeah,
stones to be able to also help make a living here as well. So there's even more. London becomes more of a home
yeah.
every single day. And this time next year, it is going to be even more real. And oh wow, I yeah, get really emotional about it because it's the dream, and it keeps happening.
Wow. Thanks, Leslie, for sharing that. That's reason for us to come visit a flat white made by Leslie Hall. Sounds good.
Come on, come on over. I've
And of
one of
course,
the
other reasons to come visit too, but that does sound nice.
one of the things I really like, it's been wild. I think I've hosted about 15 to 18 people in my very tiny flat in London over the last year of just like friends of friends being like, hey, can someone come sleep in your living room? I'm like, absolutely. So that is an open invitation at all times for anyone. There's an air mattress. There's plenty. There's not a lot of space, but we will make it work.
Make it work. That sounds good. Well, that's wonderful, Leslie, and good to know how specifically to pray, particularly around the visa process, the funding gap of about 1,000 a month, along with just an ongoing deepening of relationships, which it sounds like is happening. And
Yeah.
the way you talk about it, it does sound like you're on the precipice of something, like there's something shifting and moving, and what a joy. Well, unless the Ellis crew, please unmute yourself if you have anything you want to ask Leslie or add. Otherwise, Leslie, any parting words for the UCC community?
Whew. Yeah, I think for UCC, it's just like your fruitfulness is like beyond what you can see or even imagine. Like kind of that picture of like the dandelion that like gets spread out. Like when I think about who I've rubbed shoulders with in the UCC community and even my own life, like you are having impact and fruitfulness that literally impacts the whole world. Like it is my ministry exists here in London, but it's in Frankfurt, it's in Paris, it's in all these other different places across Europe and in different relationships that I have with even my friends. And I'm sharing what God has done through UCC.
Globally.
Begin to really like imagine. Like, I don't know, maybe we'll get to see it in eternity and we'll get to see like all the little like lines crossing and like all the like woof, the whole big picture of everything. But just be really encouraged that like the things that you're doing have just an absolutely magnificent kingdom output, like outcome and yeah, input into the world. So I'm very thankful for the way in which this community has ridiculously loved and cared for me over the last, I don't know, however long it's been. Time is a flat circle and I don't remember. I don't barely know what year it is anymore, but it is just such a joy to have such a beautiful family. And a lot of that's within UCC. So I'm really grateful for each and every single person in that community, whether we've actually met or not, because we're still part of the same story and still part of the same community and heart.
So good. Yeah, well, we're grateful for you, Leslie, and proud of you. Just
Ooh.
as I've watched even just the past few years, just you're a leader. You're a leader in the church, and you're doing amazing things, and you're doing it in a big way and in small ways, and it's inspiring. So keep
Yeah,
doing what you're doing.
thanks.
And I pray that you'll have some rest this season as you look forward to 2023 as well.
Me too.
Good stuff. All right, well, I'm going to stop recording and say goodbye to our UCC family. Bye, everyone. Thanks for
Love
watching.
y'all.